going on? Sorry, right. So welcome to this AGM D-Day talk. So what was D-Day? So we all know that D-Day actually means decision day. It's kind of been hijacked by the Normandy invasions, but it's respectively still D-Day, decision day, Normandy invasions. There's lots of operations as part of D-Day. I'm going to talk generally about D-Day, and then I'm going to focus on Pegasus Bridge. So there'll be a bit of time slicing here. So before D-Day, there was Operation Fortitude. This was the deception to try and hide the fact that we had planned to invade Normandy. We told the Germans through our spy network that we would be possibly entering Fortress Europe by Norway, Bay of Biscay, and even the soft underbelly of Europe in France. So there's many different choices there, but more importantly, our main deception was that we would attack in the Pas-de-Calais. This is obviously the shortest distance from Dover to Calais, 21 miles. It was supplemented by using a real American army, the First Army, and they were headed up by General Patton. The Germans loved General Patton. They thought he was a great general. He was aggressive. He was forward-thinking. Currently, he was persona non grata because not long before this, he'd slapped two soldiers in Sicily for cowardice. As we know now, that would be PTSD. But he was basically non-operational. So he was a perfect puppet that the Germans took the bait of, that he would be leading this big army. The army was made up of, inflatable tanks, fake landing craft, but real lorries being driven around 24/7 to make it look like they're busy. And also there was fake radio signals. So all the radio traffic was being picked up, which basically added to the deception. Now, the very, very key part of the deception was this man here. He is a double agent. He's double agent Garbo. His name is Juan Paulo Garcia. He was absolutely pivotal and a master spy. He was working for the British, but he went to the Germans to say, I'm your perfect spy. He ended up with a network of 27 fake spies across England, and each of these spies had a character and they had a backstory. Truly a master of deception. On D-Day itself, we all know what happened. We went to Normandy. I'm sure that's not a surprise, but he maintained the deception that we were going to the Pas-de-Calais. Even Hitler thought that Normandy was a feint, it was a ruse, and after the 6th of June, 2 Panzer divisions were deployed to go to Normandy beaches. That would have been a disaster. Garbo knew this, and basically he sent a direct message to the German High Command saying, don't go to Normandy, it's a ruse, they are going to attack at Calais. And because of his direct message, and he was so well respected, the Panzers turned round. And they actually, even months after Normandy, the Germans still thought that they would be attacking at the Pas-de-Calais. And his ruse was genius. This is him in spy mode. And this is him after the war. He was given an Iron Cross by the Germans for his action on D-Day. Can you believe that? But he was also rewarded with an MBE by the British government. After the war, he kind of changed his looks and appearance. He was given tens of thousands of pounds, both from the Germans and from the British, and he emigrated to Argentina, never to be seen again. So we have got a lot to thank Garbo for. Right, going back to Normandy. So we all know about this guy here, Duke William the Bastard. That's his real name. Before he became conqueror, he actually invaded Britain as a reverse action to D-Day landings. He actually came from Normandy, and he actually attacked, obviously, at Pevensey Beach, Hastings. When was the anniversary of 1066 Battle of Hastings? Anybody know? It was yesterday, 14th of October. So it's a reverse action. And Normandy basically was Norseman land. It was land gifted to King Rollo, who was the Norseman who was he was perpetually invading France and Paris. So Emperor Charlemagne said, please stop attacking us. What do you want to stop attacking us? So they gave him land, he gave him a title, and Normandy is basically a truncation of Norseman land. Right, so William the Bastard, after he conquered England, became William the Conqueror, as we all know. And if anybody didn't know, he was born in our twin town, Falaise. Right, back to the meat of it. D-Day numbers. It was definitively the biggest seaborne invasion in history. We've got 6,900 ships. We've got 156,000 soldiers, 11,500 aircraft, 23,000 airborne troops. Can you imagine? That scale is unprecedented. Now, these names you might be familiar with, the 5 beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. But what's this got to do with it? Anybody know? So, the 3 British and Canadian beaches were going to be called this: swordfish, goldfish, jellyfish. Now, Mr. Churchill didn't want his soldiers, brave soldiers, dying on a beach called Jelly. So he basically said, we're changing the name. And we changed the name to Juno, which we all know now, but it's the Roman goddess of, she's a state counselor. She's a Roman goddess, the equivalent of Hera in the Greek mythology. Right, another god, who's this? Neptune. Well done, not Poseidon, Neptune. So Neptune was a very critical part of D-Day. Did I actually start my timer? Sorry to interrupt that. I didn't actually start my timer. Oh, don't worry. I'm sure I'll get shouted at when I'm over time. Anyway, Neptune. So Neptune was very important. And this was simply the seaborne part of the operation. You imagine all those troops, all the tanks, all the lorries, they had to get to Normandy somehow. And they were basically stationed around the south coast of England. And they had a meeting point in the middle, which next slide shows its name. You can't see it, but it's called Piccadilly Circus. This was where all the ships met. And this is after the minesweepers have done their job to clear the Channel of Mines. That was a very laborious job in itself. Who's this? Why have I got Pluto up there? Of course, pipeline under the ocean. By the way, it's a goofy idea, I know, but just to reference, 2 Disney dogs, one walks on 4 legs, one walks on 2. You never think about that? So, pipeline under the ocean. This was, the Allies knew that they would need to supply thousands of tons of fuel to their advancing army. So they designed a fuel line that would go underneath the English Channel. And it was designed like this. It was an immense undertaking in itself. They say war is a mother of invention, and this is one of the fantastic inventions that come from it. The pipeline, so let me give you some statistics here. 1 mile of pipe used 24 tons of lead, 7.5 tons of steel tape, 15 tons of steel armor wire, and small amounts of lighter materials. And the actual external diameter was 4.5 inches, and the middle it's probably about 3.5, 4 inches. So that was the special armored pipe that they needed to get the fuel through the ocean. So for the weight of the water and for obstructions, it was armored. And these are the cable drums that deployed it. Right. So Pluto, it was constructed, everything was done at night in secret. The equipment was hidden under tarpaulins. There was no mention of petroleum warfare department anywhere. And all the locations were erased from maps. So delivery drivers had to phone for directions where to deliver the components to make Pluto. And the pumping stations were hidden. They were disguised as ice cream parlors, old forts, leisure centers, anything to hide again what they were doing. Right, tea time for a second. Unsung heroes. Right, now I'm a reenactor, as you might know or might gather, but I've got friends who reenact beachhead commandos. Now, I only found out this summer, listening to them, that they did a very pivotal role for D-Day. They were tasked with surveying all the beaches for Normandy beaches. They would be deployed from a mini sub in the middle of the channel. They would then kayak, 2 men kayak at a time. They'd kayak to within 1 mile of the beaches. They would swim to the shore, and this would be one of the guys swimming. He actually made this outfit himself. It's basically rubberized canvas. It's very heavy. He would swim to the shore in the dead of night, hopefully at high tide, and he would retrace his steps at regular intervals, and you'd have a plumb line. You can't see it very clearly, but on his right hip, he's got a retractable line, which is a plumb line. He would be measuring at regular intervals the gradient of the beach. At the bottom of the plumb line, there is a lead weight, which has got bitumen on it. The bitumen is very useful because when he pulls it up, the bitumen tells him what the consistency of the beach is underneath, whether it's sand, shale, shingle. We all know 2 years before this, Dieppe was a failed attempt at a beach landing in shingle, so we didn't want shingle. These are some of them in a kayak. Now, they were tasked with doing only 4 of the beaches. It was very critical that the proposed landing site was not given away. If they were caught, they were to be told, their cover story was, we are from a sunken submarine. Now, because of the secrecy, they were told not to survey Omaha. Omaha was one of the biggest beaches, the American beach. The Allies, they didn't want to risk it being taken over, being exposed. So they didn't expose Omaha Beach. And sadly, as a consequence, the unknown territory probably cost them lives of the American army that landed there. In hindsight, they should have surveyed all of them. So done at night, very dangerous, beachhead commandos. Oh yeah, close-up shot, as you can see, is just this little reel here, which is retractable. Right. Can you recognise what that is? Well done. It's a mulberry bush. Let's dance around it. So it's a mulberry bush. So again, war is the mother of invention. Mulberry Harbors were these ingenious ways of putting a sheltered harbour, a portable sheltered harbour, into the Normandy beaches where Allies could offload their big ships. The Normandy Peninsula has Cherbourg and Le Havre as deep sea ports, but they didn't know when they would be taken. So they had to make their own plans for big boats to come and deploy all the equipment, or the men, or the fuel, or the ammunition needed. So this is Mulberry Harbour. So you can see here, breakwater is made by old ships were literally sunk, and the piers were pontoon jetties. But on top of the pontoon jetties, these things are called caissons. These are huge concrete structures that were built all around the coast. They were floated to the south coast, and then before D-Day, they were sunk to hide them. And just after D-Day, when they were needed, they were refloated with air. And then they were taken across to Arromanches Beach, Sword Beach, and they were deployed as Mulberry Harbour B. You can see just how successful it is. Look at the water here, look at the rough water here, and look at the calm water inside. That is very effective. Unfortunately, Mulberry Harbour A was the American version, which was damaged in storm, so it was not effective. So here you can see a diagram of the fake harbour walls, the piers, and the pontoon bridges that are heavy enough to take all the large lorries and tanks, everything you need to be deployed. Right, tea time again. So I will repeat it again. War is the mother of invention. Percy Hobart was a North African 7th Armoured Div General that was, let's say he had an issue with a general's wife and he was repatriated to Blighty. Also, he was very forward-thinking. The army at the time in the 1940s, they didn't like his ideas. But coming back to Blighty, he invented these adaptive tanks, especially for Normandy, and they're known as Hobart's funnies. We have got on the left, top left, a swimming tank, a DD duplex tank. That is a tank that can swim in water. We've got the flamethrower tank. We've got this roller thing here to get over obstacles. That's cotton reel. We've got a flail tank for mines. And we've got a fasciche here, which is basically for climbing over ditches. As well as you've got a very Thunderbird-looking portable bridge in itself. These were very well used in the invasion of Normandy. Right, so part 2. I might be going too quickly, actually. Fine, okay, right, so part 2. The airborne assault on Benneville and Ranville bridges. This is, again, principal to the success of Normandy invasion. It's commonly known as the Pegasus Bridge Assault. It's known as Pegasus Bridge Assault because The logo of the British Airborne is Pegasus. He is the winged horse from mythology, with Bellerophon as the character riding it, who then, I believe, killed the Chimera, did all sorts of heroic things. But the Pegasus Bridge assault took the name, and you'll see later where the winged horse features. Now, we have the 1st Airborne and the 6th Airborne. What happened to 2, 3, 4, 5? They don't exist. Again, it's the British Army thinking the Germans might just think there's more of them if they missed out 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to talk about Operation Deadstick, which is the definitive operation name of the attack on Pegasus Bridge. Deadstick might return. We're talking about glider-borne infantry, so we're talking about maybe the Deadstick maybe being a joke on the joystick and the glider. Its task was to take 2 bridges over the Caen Canal, Benneville, and the River Orne at Ranville, and to hold until relieved. There were 6 gliders in total, 3 for each bridge. The ongoing operation after Deadstick, hopefully, if things went well, would be Operation Tonga, which is the total breakout from Normandy. So these again are the bridges. Sorry, these are the beaches, Gold, Juno Sword. You can just see here, these are the Orne River and the Caen Canal. If I blow that up slightly, you can see they're very close to the beach. And these are the 2 bridges which were deemed to be absolutely pivotal to the success of Operation Overlord D-Day. This is an aerial photograph, obviously. The Caen Canal here, you can see dead straight. This is the Benneville Bridge. Benneville at the time was only a few buildings. There's a little cafe here, which I'll reference later. This is the Ranville Orne Bridge. Again, nothing there. We had aerial photographs taken irregularly to check the nature of the terrain. Rommel basically was dispatched from North Africa, and Rommel was in charge of the Atlantic Wall and protecting occupied Europe. He actually flooded all of the ditches and dams, so he would have made any invasion, landing, paratroopers, whatever, trying to make it difficult by flooding everywhere. Right, now, I think most of you would have heard of this guy. This guy is Major John Howard. He was an Oxford policeman. He was in charge of D Company, 2nd Battalion, Ox and Bucks Light Infantry. He was a fanatic for physical fitness. He trained his troops to the nth degree. They did swimming, PT, running. They did night work as well, so they would do a cycle where they're sleeping during the day and they're sleeping and they're working at night training. And he basically, D Company was chosen because of this training. They were the elite of the Ox and Bucks and any light infantry of the 6th Airborne that could do it. They actually trained at a bridge in Exeter to do, they had no idea where they're going at this stage. They guessed it somewhere in Europe, but they had no idea where they're going. They were practicing blind, as it were. So Operation Deadstick, to continue, it was mainly the D Company, 2nd Battalion, Ox and Bucks, also a bit of B Company, RE attachments from 249 Forward Company RE. That comes up a bit later. Also, obviously, the glider pilots have got their own regiment. So there was 2 glider pilots per Horsa. Sorry, this is what they were flying. 2 pilots per glider. This is an airspeed Horsa glider. This is the side shot here. They were towed, in this instance, by Halifax bombers. Let's make no bones about it. These are one-use only vehicles. They are designed, they're just wood and canvas, and they are not reusable. So, as part of D-Day, the ingenious idea was taken, we need to make all our aircraft instantly recognisable so we don't suffer from friendly fire. So these are D-Day markings. These are black and white stripes that were very crudely painted very soon before D-Day. If I go back to this shot here, you can see the D-Day on the tail of the Horsa, just as instant recognition. So, come close to D-Day, John Howard, about 2 weeks before, was actually told the target, and he was also shown a model of the area that they had, that the MOD had actually made. So on top of the model, they also flew a tiny camera upside down the model to trace the steps where these gliders were meant to go. So John Howard eventually, obviously, took into confidence the 12 glider pilots, and they all watched this video. They trained on it. They had to know the terrain off by heart, almost blindfold. So this little film was a genius little help. When the pilots flew, they only had the basic instrumentation. They only had altimeters, stopwatch, and a compass. They had nothing else. And balls the size of cannonballs, I would say. But so this is the Oxen Bucks. This is just before they were going to embark on the gliders. They're having a cup of tea and a smoke. Look at this. Aren't they great chaps? And I think they're having a ham sandwich as well. Very well deserved. This is before departure. Now, this is actually a still from a film, which I think you may just have seen, called The Longest Day. It actually features Richard Todd. He comes up a bit later. Let's not skip too far forward for now. So basically, the Horsa gliders would take about 30 men. But in this instance, they were so heavily laden with loads of grenades, their submachine guns, the Sten gun, and all their ammunition, that basically the gliders were deemed to be overweight. And tragically, 2 men of each glider, 6 gliders, 2 men of each glider were told to stand down because they couldn't afford to take an overladen glider into action. These were the last men in, first men out. And can you imagine training for months and months and months, doing all this rigorous stuff? You're there, you're going to do your bit, you're going to free France, and they're told, sorry mate, can't go. They were slightly upset, to say the least, but it was necessary. So in the glider, there are no seat belts, no safety equipment. They probably would have linked arms. So it was called a coup de main, which translates as a swift blow of the hand for a swift action. Whether you want to call that a slap or a hit, I don't really know, but it was known as the coup de main. Hit of the hand, literally. So the gliders left RAF Tarrant Ruston at Dorset on 22:56 on the 5th of June, 1944, moonlit night, and they flew 70 miles across the channel and towards the coast and towards Benneville. Using, again, only the altimeter, stopwatch and a compass. Once they were released, they were on their own. Jim Warwick was the lead pilot in the glider number 1. You'll see him in a second. They actually landed at 12:15 midnight on 6th of June, but French time, they actually landed 11:15. So if you go to Pegasus Bridge, you'll know that there's a little memorial to the gliders landing on the 5th of June at 11:30 at night. This is a very romanticised painting of the 3 gliders that are approaching Benneville Bridge. So you can see 2 have landed already. Glider number 2 has, as I said, a more crash land than land. And this one's broken in half. You can see Pegasus Bridge here. I'm sure you're familiar with the image. And this is Café Gondree here. Moonlit night. You can see that when they were flying, they would have used the moon reflected in the water for clear guidance. They knew where they're going. So this is Jim Warwick. As I said, he's glider pilot number 1 in John Howard's own glider. He got a DSO. He landed John Howard's glider overladen at night. And I'll just show you where it was on this image here. 170 feet. So this is the bridge here. This is his first glider. I can't see where it is. There it is. So he landed 170 feet from his target. That has been described as the best piece of flying in the whole of the Second World War. Incredible, considering the circumstances. The glider pilots actually were repatriated to fly again. I'll try and reference something that's a bit of a sad story a bit later on. But these were the gliders, the actual gliders on landing. You can see one's broken in half. Right, cup of tea time. Why have I got a picture of this guy up there? You know who he is. Stevie Wonder. So, This is to remind me to tell you about a little story about John Howard. So basically, you're in this big glider, you all linked arms together, you crash land. Nearly all of them fell unconscious. The pilot sometimes through the plexiglass. John Howard woke up blind. Why was he blind? Anybody know? So he was wearing a helmet like this, and it had knocked completely over his eyes. So he woke up and he couldn't see. But it was just literally the force of the impact that knocked the helmet down. So he quite realised that he was okay. And they gathered their stuff. And very swiftly, they all deployed from the gliders and they approached the bridge. They could see it clearly in the moonlight. This is quarter past 12 English time. John Howard's friend was the first person to be shot on the bridge. Now, they approached the bridge. The bridge had German machine guns around it. But when the Germans heard the noise, they thought it was from a crash bomber because there were other raids going on. They honestly thought that it was a bomber that had crashed. So they weren't expecting a load of infantry dressed exactly like this to be rushing across the bridge with machine guns exactly like this, to be firing, throwing grenades, or hell would have let loose for a brief few minutes on that bridge. But during those brief few minutes, this chap, Den Brotheridge, lieutenant, he died. He was the first person to be shot. He got shot in the neck as he was approaching the western side of the canal of the bank. He got shot almost quite quickly. He didn't die. He was taken back to a first aid rally point, which was near the gliders. And unfortunately, he died about 2 a.m. He was a personal friend of John Howard. And his wife was pregnant at home. And the daughter was born, obviously. And I've met the daughter at Pegasus Bridge. She comes to the remembrance anniversaries. So he never met his daughter. But he's the first person to get shot in combat. Now, was he the first person to get killed in combat? Well, tragically, you saw the second glider break in two, and I told you that Rommel flooded the marshland. He flooded to make it marshy. Lance Corporal Fred Greenhalgh actually fell unconscious face down into the water, and he drowned. He was the first casualty on D-Day, definitively. This is like 12:15 on D-Day itself. 6 hours before the Normandy beaches were even close to being attacked. This is some actual bullet strikes in the Pegasus Bridge itself. Pegasus Bridge, I'll show you a photograph coming on, but the old bridge was removed. They actually widened the Caen Canal and they maintained the old bridge. They put it in the museum about literally half a mile away. So this you can walk over the bridge. These are bullet strikes. So we've had dead hero, unsung heroes, and we've got local hero. So I mentioned that there was 249 Field Company Royal Engineers on board the operation. This chap here is born in Ethelbed, Harry Wheeler. He was a Remy sapper. He was in John Howard's glider number 1. So there had been 2 sappers in that glider, and he was tasked with disabling the bridge. Again, let's not remember, the important thing is the bridges were captured intact because we needed it. You saw how close they were to the Normandy beaches. They were imperative for a breakout when it came. So Sapper Harry Wheeler, he was tasked with disabling the explosives. But when he got there, he found there was actually wires, detonators, but no explosives. So he still was able to, he was necessary to disable the detonators. And he used a pair of wire cutters. These are actually his wire cutters, now in the museum. And although they had rubber handles, cutting one of the wires, he still got a big shock and was thrown backwards. Now, going back to the film Longest Day, if you look at the Longest Day sequence that features Pegasus Bridge, you'll notice the sappers are climbing underneath the bridge very theatrically and disabling the big sticks of dynamite, if I remember in my mental image, there's dynamite underneath there. John Howard was the advisor on the film, and he said to the director, when he saw what he was doing, well, I told you that so I didn't mention this earlier, the wires were on top, they weren't underneath, and there was no explosives. So the director had decided to put the wires underneath and the explosive underneath for theatrical effect. John Howard said, well, I did tell you what happened, you won't listen to me. So that's obviously the films and photographers just don't trust them. Right. So basically, the action that cost Den Brotheridge's life only took 10 minutes. From landing to going across the bridge, there was 2 machine guns, there was a pillbox, so there was a machine gun sanger. There was only 10 minutes of action. Really, really swift. And on completion of the mission, the signaller was able to send a message back to GHQ saying, ham and jam. Ham and jam famously was the code words for both bridges taken successfully intact. Now, going back to the actual area that was around it, there was this thing. Rommel was in charge of defences. Part of the reason why Pegasus was a success was because this is called Rommel's asparagus. It's a big fence post with a mine on the end of it. It was all over Normandy and all the French coast. So if you landed on it, it would blow up. It was not in place for D-Day. Now, we knew this because we had reconnaissance aircrafts daily going over, taking pictures. Now, there was conscripts that were meant to have put it in that week. Luckily, they were lazy conscripts and they didn't do it. It would have been a different matter if the asparagus had been there. Right, another glug of tea. So the German counterattack was soon to come, and it came in the form of none other than the 21st Panzer Division. Now, the 21st Panzer Division were in the desert where my dad was fighting the 8th Army. Von Luck was the commander of the 21st Panzer, and he sent in his Panzer Army, basically. Coincidentally, after the war, well, he survived, John Howard survived, Von Luck and John Howard both became friends. Now, the pilots, the lights, the glide-borne infantry, they couldn't carry very much. They carried, I said, grenades, Sten guns, some tobacco, but the biggest weapon they took with them was this thing here. It's called a PIAT. It stands for Projector Infantry Anti-Tank. It is a horrible thing to use, and the British Army hated it. It's a spring-loaded mortar. Basically, you've got to push the thing down on a compressed spring, release it, and it goes allegedly 100 meters. But in reality, it's a close proximity weapon. You have to be quite close to your target to use it. Now, this member of D Company, Wagger, what a name's Wagger, eh? Wagger Thompson, he was able to get close to the first tank that came down the Bentonville High Street. This is the west end of where we're talking about, onto the bridge. The gliders are on the east side of the bank. The counterattack came from the west. Wagger Thornton was able to get close enough to deploy his PIAT, and he struck it so well that the tank brewed up, which is what we say when the shape charge goes inside and it ignites all the ammunition inside. Horrible, deadly. It went up like a Roman candle. Now, because of this, the Germans thought that the D Company had proper anti-tank artillery. And because of that, they withdrew all their panzers. There was a counterattack on foot, but that actually ended the counterattack of panzers, luckily. Now, the Ox and Bucks were relieved half an hour after they landed by 7th Battalion Paras. And in the Paras, there's this gentleman called Richard Todd, and we all know him. He's an actor, and he's actually on the right here. So he was actually part of the battalion that relieved D Company from the bridges, literally half an hour after it was successfully taken. Now, going back to this slightly known film, Longest Day, Richard Todd played John Howard in the film The Longest Day. And in this part of the section of the film, John Howard's basically in the middle, and he's talking to Lord Lovett. Now, Lord Lovett was commander of the 6th Commandos and also the 1st Special Service Brigade. He had made it from Sword Beach with this gentleman here who managed to get across the beach with just a set of bagpipes. He is Mad Piper Bill Millin, and he was with the commandos, and it must have been a great relief. So this is the 7th Power were the first to help. This was the 1st Force Power. There was a lot of men to take over and take the brunt of the counterattack. So Bill Millin was the famous Mad Piper. Here he is just before he stepped off the landing craft on D-Day. It's the only photograph that I found between him and later on. Now, the Germans didn't shoot him. I mean, you think he stands like a sore thumb, but the Germans didn't shoot him, one, because they thought he was mad, and second, evidently, it was possibly unlucky to shoot a musician. So here we go. So the counterattack was unsuccessful. We are closing the end, so don't worry about that, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pegasus Bridge. Just after it was taken, you can see it was clearly useful for taking all your supplies over. This is the bridge as it is now. It's been replaced, as I said, about half a mile away. It's in the grounds of the Pegasus Museum, and I kind of think that some of you might have seen it. They widened the bridge. The new bridge is the same design, just wider. Now, this is one of my favourite bits. This is Café Gondree. Now, I showed you the aerial picture of the area at Benneville, and one of the buildings there, close to the riverbank, is Café Gondree. It was run by Georges and Teresa Gondree. When they heard the commotion, they didn't know what was going on. They just hid in the cellar. But they recognised the English dialect. Teresa spoke German and George spoke English, so they recognised the language, and they rushed out and they saw these men, dark of night, dressed like this, covered in black. They kissed them all the time, and they got black themselves by taking over the camouflage. Now, they had buried all their champagne stores in the garden. They didn't want the Germans to have it. First thing they did, they dug it up and they started handing bottles of champagne to the soldiers. You know, this is only like half past midnight, and quite soon Oxen Bucks have done their job, and they are reaping the rewards. So they were the first French property to be liberated. Now, because Teresa spoke German, she was actually able to earwig the German officers' conversations around the table outside the cafe. You can imagine they congregate. They say, loose lips cost lives. We had that over in Blighty, but the Germans maybe didn't think it was so important over there because they were speaking a different language. Teresa was passing on all the information she could to the French resistance. So soon after it was liberated, you can see the bridge here became associated forever with the British Airborne. Pegasus symbol became Pegasus Bridge. If you are a member of the British Airborne Forces, you will go there and you'll be treated like royalty by the daughter now, because both the mother and father have sadly passed, but the daughter is now carrying on the tradition of looking after the airborne. Right, so nearly there. Right, so the famous question is, up the Oxen Bucks. So I've done a couple of memorial visits to Normandy, and especially Pegasus Bridge. So I was in Caen Town Hall getting my car pass a few years ago. I met a veteran in the town hall, and he was with his daughter, and he was struggling to get some of the paperwork done. So I actually had a spare car pass, so I just said, look, have my pass. And as you do, I started talking to him, and he told me he was actually in a duplex tank, DD tank crew on D-Day. And he told me about his story, his training, and his daughter then said to me, he's told you more in 10 minutes than he told me in my whole life. So John Hayes, I met him after my trip. I went to his house and I recorded an interview of him and his memories of training. He was with the 4th, 7th Royal Dragoons. He told me a story where he was training. So this is a duplex tank. This is a Sherman or a Valentine. It's got canvas sides on a metal frame that acts like a boat. Duplex means it's duplex drive. It's got a propeller and it's also engine on track. He was in one of those crews, and in training, they weren't always successful, shall we say. And in training, one of his tanks was sinking, and he had to pull the driver out of the driver's position, otherwise he'd have drowned. On D-Day, they deployed 26 of these on, I think it was Gold Beach. Out of the 26 they deployed, they only lost 1 to sinking. The Americans at Omaha had the same number of tanks, and it's the opposite number. Only 1 survived to the beach. They deployed their duplex tanks 6 miles out. It was ridiculous. Tragically, many lives were lost. Not only were the drivers, it's very hard to get out. You're in rough seas, you're in a very small confined environment. But also, if you're crew, you stand around the outside. And when the rough waves crash down on this contraption, the metalwork literally pins your feet. Many soldiers were taken to the bottom of the channel in these tanks. Right. Deep breath, nearly there. So again, this is me as a reenactor on the original Pegasus Bridge. This is me with my reenactor friends at Pegasus Bridge at night, trying to just get some of the atmosphere and just trying to absorb some of it. And I will say thank you very much. We are at the end. You have been watching me. Thank you very much. Any questions? Any questions? Sorry, John. Any questions?
Well, before a question, I'm going to say something. I'm
John, over to you.
At the moment. Fantastic. With these lectures concerning key events in any war, especially the Second World War, it's to do with strategy, tactics, and a lot of things like that. When it comes down to it, it's down to individuals. And we're so lucky in Henley to have an individual who actually cut the wires under the bridge. Harry Wheeler, who we'll never forget, and he did his job, and it was for years, even the family didn't know what he'd done. Later on, if you've got time, on the table here, there's one of the obituaries for Harry, and some photographs too. There's also a very good photograph of Harry talking to General Dannett when he went to one of the big reunions. So I mentioned that in passing. Also, in honour of the Upton Bucklighter victory, we've got the flag there. Enough from me, but again, fantastic talk. Carry on if you've got questions. Thank you.
Any questions? One question. Alfred.
Me?
Yeah.
I come from Suffolk, as a few of you know, and I remember in the war, I was born in the sailing village of Wardenfield, which is on the River Demon. It was halfway between Woodbridge and Bawdsey, where the first radar was installed. Anyway, I remember on our beach, there were what they called landing towers, and this is, I didn't realise, nobody realised at the time, but these were dummy landing towers for men getting onto boats, going off for the invasion. And I remember my father was a keen yachtsman saying that just downriver there was a large mud bank which was fully visible low tide. The Germans apparently thought it was a frigate, and they bombed it. And he was so glad because entirely just because he's not getting stuck on this mud bank. It bombed it out of the river. Then.
I've just mentioned, because I've got a few minutes, there was, in preparation for D-Day, there was a disastrous operation that was kept quiet for decades. This is Operation Tiger. This is training on, I think it was Staunton Sands? Slapton Sands, sorry, I knew it was this. So basically, they were training for beach landings. The American and the British trained together. They didn't have the same radio channels. There was German E-boats in the channel, and the German E-boats basically were firing at the landing craft. They didn't know they were landing craft full of men. They thought they were maybe just barges. So I think about 700 soldiers were killed there, and it was kept quiet for many, many, many years. And all the deaths were then obviously attributed to post-Normandy. They didn't want to be known to have their sons and fathers and brothers to be killed in training. They were officially killed in Normandy. Right, any other questions?
Yeah, just to add to that, those of you who went to hear General Dannett and the historian the other day, General Dannett was very much involved in all memorials, and he insisted that the names of all those who were killed at Slapton Sands went on to the Normandy Memorial, because although they weren't killed in the operation, they were, in effect, all part of it. But just two comments that might interest or amuse you. My father-in-law was in the Hussar Cavalry and was corralled into the southeast of England before D-Day. My wife, my father-in-law's oldest daughter, was born about 2 weeks before D-Day. So my father-in-law went to his commanding officer and said, we might not all come back. We're off to D-Day soon, we don't know where it is, some of us may not come back. My wife's just had a daughter. Can I fly over to Belfast and see her and come back? And his commanding officer said, the only person who can give you permission is General Montgomery. So I'll arrange for you to see him. So off father-in-law went to General Montgomery's caravan. I can't imitate Montgomery, but Montgomery said, can you keep the trap shut? And my father-in-law said, sir. So Monty said, off you go, be back on Monday. I only say that because it shows a very human side of Montgomery, which a lot of people thought he was most inhuman. The other thing that's of interest, those of you who listen to General Dannett, the historian with General Dannett gave the impression that a lot of people, including Stalin, didn't believe that Churchill was in favour of the Second Front. Way back in about 1941, when things were going incredibly badly, we were losing the Battle of the Atlantic, everything was going wrong. At that stage, Churchill sent a minute to General Morgan, who was the planner for D-Day, and one of his Action This Day minutes. And it said something like, I want you to devise and construct 2 harbours that will go up and down with the sea. And that was way back in 1941, which showed, I think, Churchill's amazing vision for the whole thing.
No, fine. Thank you for that addition. Right. Any more questions?
Major Howard wrote a book about these landings, didn't he? Fly the landings. Am I wrong in saying that?
Yeah, I've read several books on the Pegasus action. I think I have read his book, but this was quite a few years ago. I'm sure if you Google it, it will come up.
You have read it, because I have.
There you go. There you go. Confirmation. My memory's not as good as Lizzie's. There was a second question. Was it David or Stan?
Yeah, you commented on how the initial group that came out of the gliders were relieved very quickly afterwards by hundreds of troops.
7th Para.
How did they get there?
Oh, they're parachutes. They were 7th Battalion parachutists. They were parachutists. And that's why the bigger force was the land force that came from the beach.
And so they were parachuted in behind the beaches.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was lots of parachute, even on the US airborne side, on Utah and Omaha. As you were seeing Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan, parachutes everywhere. Poor John Steele, he got stuck on the bell tower of the church spire, and he was hanging there for hours on end with the ringing in his ears. That's John Steele. And they, to commemorate him, they still put a dummy up there now. But yeah, no, they're parachutists. Any other questions? I thank you very much.